Peace built on fear. Is that really peace? Or is it just silence before the next war? Because the truth is, most people misunderstand Pain. They call him a villain, a terrorist, a monster. But Pain wasn't born evil. He was created by the world he lived in. A world that taught him one brutal lesson over and over again: that peace is nothing more than a temporary illusion, constantly shattered by human selfishness. And the deeper you look into his story, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Because Pain didn't just believe in suffering, he believed suffering was necessary. Nagato was once just a child, an innocent boy growing up in a war-torn land where death was normal and survival was never guaranteed. He didn't dream of power, he dreamed of peace. Real peace, the kind where no child has to watch their parents die. But reality had other plans. His parents were killed right in front of him. Not by monsters, not by villains, but by shinobi who were supposed to be the good guys. That moment broke something inside him. Because for the first time, he realized something terrifying. That in war, there are no heroes, only survivors and victims. And that's where Pain's philosophy begins. As Nagato grew, so did his understanding of the world's hypocrisy. Nations fought in the name of peace, while creating endless suffering. Leaders spoke of justice, while sacrificing innocent lives. Everyone claimed to want peace, but no one was willing to experience the pain required to truly understand it. And that's when Pain reached his conclusion. A conclusion that most people fear to even consider. Humans will never understand each other until they all feel the same pain. To Pain, empathy wasn't natural. It had to be forced. Because people don't change through words. They don't change through ideals. They change through suffering. Real, undeniable suffering that leaves a scar on the soul. And in his mind, that was the only way to end the cycle of hatred. But here's where it gets deeper. Pain didn't just want revenge. He didn't want chaos. He wanted control. Not for power, but for order. He believed that if he could create a weapon so devastating, so terrifying, that the entire world would live in fear of using it, then war would stop. Not because people became good, but because they became afraid. Afraid to lose everything. Afraid to suffer the same way he did. This is where his God complex begins. Pain no longer saw himself as human. He saw himself as something greater, unnecessary evil, a force that would bring balance to a broken world, someone who would carry the burden of becoming a villain so that others could live in peace. And in a strange way, that's what makes him different from typical villains. He wasn't blinded by hatred. He was driven by logic. Cold, painful logic built from trauma. But here's the question no one wants to answer. Was he wrong? Because if you look at history, real history, peace has often been maintained through fear, through power, through the threat of destruction. Nations don't always choose peace because they want to. They choose it because they're afraid of the consequences of war. And that's exactly what Pain understood. He didn't trust human nature. He studied it and accepted its flaws. But at the same time, there's a flaw in his philosophy. Because Pain doesn't just create understanding, it also creates more hatred. And that's the paradox. Pain believed that by making the world suffer together, humanity would finally unite. But what he failed to see is that suffering doesn't always lead to empathy. Sometimes it leads to revenge, to anger, to an even deeper cycle of violence. The very thing he was trying to destroy, he was also feeding. And that's what makes his character so powerful. He's not just a villain you defeat. He's an idea you have to confront. Because deep down, part of what he says makes sense. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because once you start believing that pain is the only path to peace, you justify destruction. You justify control. You justify becoming the very thing you once hated. But then comes the moment that breaks his ideology. When he meets Naruto, Someone who experienced pain, loss, loneliness, but chose a different path. Someone who refused to let suffering define his actions. Naruto doesn't deny pain's reality, he challenges it. He proves that understanding doesn't have to come from shared suffering. It can come from shared humanity. And that's where pain begins to collapse. Not because he was defeated physically, but because his belief system was shaken. For the first time, he saw a possibility he never considered. That peace might not come from fear, but from connection. From choosing to understand others without needing to suffer like them. And in that moment, Nagato returns. Not as a god, not as pain, but as a human who finally sees that his solution, no matter how logical it seemed, was still part of the problem. And that's the tragedy of his story. Because pain wasn't evil. He was broken by truth. A truth about human nature that most people ignore. He saw the darkness in the world, and instead of running from it, he tried to control it. But in doing so, he became consumed by it. So now the question comes back to you. If you lived in a world like his, where pain is constant, where peace is fragile, where people only understand loss after experiencing it, would you choose Naruto's path or pain's? Because it's easy to call him wrong until you understand him.